Once you start thinking about estate planning, it's literally everywhere. It's in movies, books, it's everywhere. Because, it's part of life. Death is part of life. And planning for death is extremely sensitive. I acknowledge that. It's not, the most fun thing to spend your money on, for one, or spend your time thinking about. But it is so important.
Hi, I'm Peavy.
Hi, I'm Jamie. And welcome to Blank is a Mother podcast. We've been best friends since college, and we're using a comparative lens to share how we're coming into our power after 40.
We aren't supposed to compare, right? Well, we all know that's not realistic.
We started this podcast when our boys were toddlers. They are growing fast, and we've been growing too.
The first few years of motherhood shook our lives and friendship like no other experience has. And by comparing and contrasting our evolution up to that point in our lives and beyond, we have discovered the strongest threads of sisterhood yet.
Listen, we don't have all the answers. We sure have made some missteps.
Follow along as we do our best to nurture our friendship and build an inclusive community while making 1,000 tiny mama decisions in an unfair world. Hi, I'm Peavy.
Hi, I'm Jamie, and welcome to Blank is a Mother podcast.
Today we have another very, very special guest, Jillian Cardona from Peace of Mind Planning. She is an estate planning attorney. She's actually local to my community here in Santa Barbara, California. That's how I came across her. But this is a topic that I think our listening community has wanted to talk about for a long time, but especially after our financial planning episode with Karen Holloway.
Karen shared so much with us in that episode about techniques around saving and how to make investments and retirement and the income piece. And then now we wanted to take it a step further and invite Jillian to come and discuss with us what to do when you have those investments and savings account and assets and retirement funds. Then what do you do with all of that? How do you put together a comprehensive plan so that, God forbid, but we know it's inevitable that we will pass, what we can do now, making it as easy as possible for the next generation to handle our assets. And it's like building generational wealth, but also trying to do it in a way that makes it easier for you while you're already trying to mourn the loss of a loved one.
Absolutely. I know I came away with a to-do list, a pretty solid to-do list. So I do encourage you to either make a mental note or bring a pad and pen, because she definitely breaks it down how to avoid probate court and how to avoid paying all these unnecessary fees to the state and the courts when all those bits of income could be going to your kids or your loved ones or charities that you really want to support after you're gone. So much that she shares with us. I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this conversation.
100%. And similarly to what we recommended for Karen's episode, when there was so much knowledge, like don't hesitate to listen to Jillian's episode 2 times or 3 times, because she does provide a lot of information.
Yeah, and definitely share, because, we identified some people in our lives that we know need to listen to this, whether they're our partners or our parents, or maybe you have a girlfriend or a friend who just thinks, oh, well, I'm not married and, I don't have kids. I don't need to do all this. And I think we illustrate several times in the conversation that every single person needs to go through an estate planning process with someone who's knowledgeable. So there are some DIY tools out there that Jillian says work for a small fraction of the population, but 9 times out of 10, you're probably one of those people that needs to go and speak with a professional, because it's not just protecting your assets like you described. It's also identifying a lot of people who are going to take over decision making when you're gone for lots and lots of different things that are important to you.
Well stated, Peeve.
Let us know what you think too. We're excited to hear. Well, we are so excited to have Jillian Cardona from Peace of Mind Planning with us here today. I know Jillian we have sort of a mama support group, but we've kind of added people to our chain as we've gone along and shared resources. And bounced ideas off, asked questions. And that's how Jillian and I are connected. And it's so cool to meet you in person. And one of the things you've shared with that thread, and of course, all the mamas and parents in Santa Barbara, where we live, is your expertise as an estate planning attorney. So I would love if you could just kick off this conversation, couple tidbits about yourself, and especially why you wanted to start Peace of Mind Planning, because I know attorneys have a lot of choices and they can work for other firms and, kind of create their own destiny. So I'm really curious why you decided to start Peace of Mind.
Like you said, I'm Jillian Cardona, and I am the founding attorney of Peace of Mind Planning. And I'm based here in Santa Barbara, but I also work throughout Southern California. So I do all of my meetings digitally, except for the very last one, which is the signing ceremony, which is a little celebration. So I work primarily here in Santa Barbara and in San Diego, but I can serve all of California. I am a California licensed attorney, so everything that I say will be relevant to California, but it could also apply to other states, but you'd have to check because not all states are the same. So I'll just preface that also. And also that it's not legal advice. I'm just sharing my experience and the experiences of my clients. The reason why I chose estate planning is because it's about what is most personal to people. And I found that once I became a mother, those were the things that were really important to me. The really intentional way of living so that you leave a legacy that you're proud of and that your children can be proud of. And that's really what drew me to estate planning. But I'll jump into, what is estate planning? So I like to think of it as, setting up a roadmap for what happens to, your belongings once you're gone, your belongings, your assets, everything once you're gone. But as parents, one of the most important things that we plan for in estate planning is what happens to your kids once you're gone. So whether they're babies or minors and you need to set up guardianships, or whether they're adults, what estate planning really does is it makes the process of your passing as easy and inexpensive as possible for your family. You're doing a lot of the actual work and emotional work while you're still alive so that your kids don't have to take care of it once you're gone. What estate planning actually looks like once you go through the process is a bunch of documents. So, it's a list of instructions, and that can range from like your basic will all the way through like trust planning. And then you also have these documents that are called ancillary documents. And we can talk about those as we go through with your questions.
No, Jillian, that's very helpful because I think that when we had Karen Holloway on for the financial planning episode, we talked a lot about savings and investments and retirement. And then we had a lot of feedback from folks that said, hey, we'd like to hear the next step, which is the estate planning. Once you have all of those investments, then what happens when you are no longer here on this earth? So I'd like to maybe take us back and do a little bit of like 101 if we can. Do you mind defining for us, Jillian, what actually is an estate? Old school, I thought estate. I just thought of a big old house. That's what I thought estate. And so in the context of this conversation, estate clearly does not mean that. So can you just help our listeners understand what an estate is, and then what a trust is, and what the difference is, if there is any?
Absolutely. So that's one of I think the biggest misconceptions about estate planning. They really should give it a different name. I don't know if death planning is what you would want to go with, but that's essentially what it is. So your estate is every single thing that you own, from your nail polish up to your house, to your investment accounts, to your car. It's everything that you own. So even if you don't think that you have that big of an estate, you probably do once you get it all down on paper. And also, estate planning is not just for the rich. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. You're not only planning also for death, but you're also planning for whatever would happen if you were incapacitated and weren't able to communicate. So I talk about death a lot. I talk about being in a coma a lot. I talk about car accidents and tragedy. But getting back to your question about what an estate is, it's everything that you own. A trust is a paper document. And it's just a list of instructions about what should happen when and who should be in charge of what. So when you are alive, you create a trust document. And most of my clients use revocable trusts. So it's something that you can change at any point. But you create this document, and if you're married, you would likely create a joint trust for you and your partner. And it just gives the instructions about what's going to happen to your stuff when you're gone or if you're incapacitated. The trust is the set of instructions, and the estate is all of the stuff.
Thank you for that. Estate are your assets. The trusts are the documents that lay out not only what your assets are, but then what happens to your assets and even medical decisions. Is that all part of the trust too, the medical documents?
The trust is just the instructions for what's going to happen to your stuff.
Got it.
When you do estate planning with an estate planning attorney, they will make sure that you have all of the ancillary documents in place that cover all of the other stuff. So all of, your power of attorney, your healthcare directive, your HIPAA waivers, your guardianship documents, they're going to make sure that you not only complete all of those, but that they're executed properly so that they can actually take effect when they need to. What you have is your estate, and that's all your things, everything that you own. Then you have the trust, which is your instructions that tell whoever your successor trustee is what to do with your stuff. And then you have these ancillary documents, and they're the ones that handle those healthcare, who makes your healthcare decisions if you're unable to communicate, who takes over, with your kids, if you aren't there, you or your partner aren't there, and all of those other decisions. So estate planning encompasses all of those things.
To that point, sort of, you're talking about the elements that are kind of required in the process of estate planning when you're working with an attorney. And one of the elements that I keep hearing over and over again is that you have to take an inventory of your assets. And this is a question that my husband and I get every year when we go to review all of our insurance policies and see oh, do we need to up this or that? And they're like, oh, what are your assets? What are you worth? I'm like, I don't know. I kind of I make some stuff up, but how do you actually do an inventory of your assets? Is there a spreadsheet or a Google form? Because I feel like we're missing stuff. Maybe we're not counting everything that is truly an asset. Big question maybe, but how do you actually go about doing it?
I always recommend assembling your A team. And so that's going to be your CPA, your financial advisor, and your estate planning attorney. Everyone needs those three people in their lives. And they will all work together to figure out the best strategy for your family, because it is a lot, like you're saying, and there will be things that you forget. The beautiful thing about a trust is that it's like a will on steroids. You create this backpack, and it's a much better backpack than just a will is. But I'll talk about that in a minute too. But you create this backpack, and then you put all of your assets into the backpack. You design the backpack exactly how you want it, and then you put assets in and take them out. So as your life changes, like you're saying, good for you for reviewing your insurance policies every year. That's a great idea.
Doing something right.
Yeah. I also recommend, reviewing your estate plan if you have more kids, if life changes. That's the only constant is change. So, you want to stay up to date on all of these things, and having your A team in place definitely helps you accomplish that. But the trust, you can take things in and out. That's the beauty of having a revocable trust. Also, you can change it anytime you want. So once you design your backpack, you can put things in and out, and you can change it. So that's why I always recommend getting that trust document in place. Once you're married, and especially if you have a kid, get the trust document in place, because once you have the base layer, then you can make changes. That's the key, I think, is having the correct documents in place, and then everything else kind of plays into it.
I can tell you this, Jillian, since we're all Circle of Trust and we're family at this point, for at least for the next, hour we have you. John and I do have an estate planning attorney, and we were going through the exercise, and we were like, holy hell, we have to pull all of these things together. And it was kind of, honestly, it was a little morbid. I started feeling like this is a lot, because you're planning for what's going to happen should something happen to me. I mean, it's inevitable that all of us are going somewhere at some point, wherever you believe your somewhere is to be. I had some emotional reactions to this planning process, and also thinking, We were dragging our feet a little bit on gathering all the documents because it was a lot. So it was overwhelming, but I'm glad that we went through the exercise. So this is helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, like you are doing the emotional work so that your kids don't have to do it later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, one of the best gifts that you can give them is doing all the work so that once you're gone, their process is as easy, as inexpensive, and not as emotional as it would need to be.
And that's a perfect segue into our next question, because we wanted to ask, and I think you touched on this, so maybe you can dig into it a little bit deeper. When is the right time to start getting your trust in place?
I like to say once you have a spouse or kids or a family whose life will change once you're gone, if they depend on you financially, if they depend on you emotionally, anyone who's depending on you, you want to get your estate plan in place because you want to be able to offer guidance, formalized guidance once you're gone. That's really what estate planning does, is you can offer that formalized guidance and make sure that they're taken care of the best that they can be. That's a lot of times when people first think of estate planning is once they have their first child or when that first child is on the way. So if you can get that work done before the kids come, because it's crazy once the kids get there,
Amen.
Everything gets a little bit harder once the kids are there. So if you could, that sweet spot between right after you get married and right before you have a kid, that would be obviously the ideal plan. But I can just speak to California in particular. If you have an estate worth less than $185,000, you are able to go through an abbreviated probate process so that you can avoid probate. Once you have an estate worth over $185,000, that's when you'll have to go through probate. And that's the really long, drawn out process that you want to avoid for your family. You want to avoid it. It's expensive. It takes a long time. You want to avoid it. So especially once your estate is worth more than $185,000, that's also a factor of when you want to get an estate plan done. And that number is different state to state, but that's what it is here in California.
Can we take a step back? Because, we're like Judge Judy kind of people. So you mentioned probate court.
Yes.
And I have heard that term a lot over the past few years. I don't know if it's because my mom has been an executor, my brother-in-law has been an executor. So I feel like it's just that time of our lives, I guess, where we start hearing these terms more and more. What is it and how do you avoid it? And why do we want to avoid it?
Okay. Yeah. So let me also take a few steps back. Like we were saying, estate planning generally is these documents that you put in place that are instructions for the people that you leave behind. So a lot of people think of estate planning as just having a will. And a will is a document that can distribute some of your assets, but it can't distribute all of them. And it also guarantees that you're going to go through probate. So now let's talk about what probate is. So probate court is where your estate will be brought before a judge, and a judge will have to decide where all of your assets are distributed. The judge will use your will as a guideline for where you want your estate to go. But there are 4 pretty big downsides to probate court. The first is that it's an entirely public process. Here in Santa Barbara, anyone can go down to the courthouse on Anacapa and request the will of somebody who has passed away. That's how all of the reporters got access to, Michael Jackson's will, to, all of the wills of these big celebrities. They have access because they are public documents. It's not just because they're celebrities. It's because they're public documents. The next is that it's extremely expensive. In California, it ends up being anywhere from 3 to 4% of your entire estate. That's a lot of money that is not going to your kids. It's not going to your beneficiaries. It's going to court fees and attorney's fees and all the other fees, that end up stacking up and will not go to the people that you want them to go to. Especially here in California, probate takes a long time. It can take years, literally years. And during that time, your beneficiaries are not going to have access to your assets. And also, there's no guardrails when you have a will and the will goes through probate. You can't put any sort of stipulations on how your kids can inherit. So no one who is under 18 can inherit any assets. So what happens is if you die intestate, which means you don't have any estate planning in place, or you have a will and you have a minor child, they will end up getting a huge check on their 18th birthday. If you look at like athletes that sign big contracts right out of college, or people that get a large sum of money, like from the lottery, most of the time that money is gone within 18 months. Those are 4 huge reasons why you want to avoid probate. The way that you can avoid probate, there's a solution, is through a trust. So you'll set up this trust, and like I said, you'll give all the instructions to your successor trustees, because during your lifetime, you are the creator of the trust and you are the trustee. You set it up so that you name a successor trustee and a couple backups. I always recommend at least 2 backups, just in case, the person predeceases you or they're unwilling or unable to serve. You have a few people in line. So that successor trustee can take those instructions, which are private, both while you're alive and after you're gone. Your trust is a private document. You get to design your backpack. You get to say what happens. And one of the huge benefits of a trust is that you can set up a trust within a trust for your kids. So you can set up a children's trust. And I like to describe it as like a tube of toothpaste rather than just like a check, one big check. So they'll get their tube of toothpaste and they'll have a trustee who they can go to that can give them access to their funds for what we call HEMS, which is health, education, maintenance, and support. So if they want to go to college, if they want a down payment for a house, if they want to start a business, they can have access to the money, but because it's with a trustee, it's protected. So it's protected from lawsuits. It's protected from if they get, that first love, that first marriage that doesn't last. It's protected from divorce. It's protected from bad decisions, money mistakes that, we all make when we're young. It's protected still. So what I usually recommend my clients with minor children do is set up their trust and then set up their children's trust within that trust. And it's all within one document. And what's nice is you can also set an age where the child becomes their own trustee. So they get to take over and they lose some of that protection, the like lawsuit protection, they lose some of that, but you can set it at an age where they'll be more responsible and they'll be better stewards of their own assets, of their own money. Anywhere from like 30 to 35, sometimes 25. If you have a very responsible child, you can set it at 25.
Thinking of myself when I was 25.
25 would not have been good for Jamie, so that's good.
And what's really nice about this kind of planning, and you really do get the peace of mind, is if you have a child who has substance abuse issues or mental health issues, you can set up this children's trust and you cannot set an expiry date. So you can make sure that they'll always have access to funds through their trustee. And you really will be able to have that peace of mind at night, not worrying about your child having what they need, having access to funds for that health, education, maintenance, or support.
Yeah, I can see that being so helpful if you have a child with a disability.
Exactly.
This is so interesting because I was just thinking of this real life example that I didn't even know I had until you were sharing all this stuff about probate. My parents got divorced. I hadn't really talked to my dad since I was in 3rd grade. And then life went on and he was in Virginia. He passed away and it must have been his second ex-wife who was like the executor or whatever, making the decisions, because she sent a very formal letter from her attorney to my sister and I that was a copy of my father's will. My sister and I were not in the will by any means. And our mindset is like, we didn't get anything from him when he was alive. We didn't want anything from him when he was dead. But I could see now that she must have been shaking in her boots because we could have gone after, in this probate court situation, I think, because we were like his blood children.
Exactly.
And I'm sure he did not have an estate plan. Anyway, that is so interesting. I never put all that together until you just kind of walked us through that.
You could have contested it. I mean, that just illustrates the benefit of having a trust, because the second ex-wife or whoever wouldn't have even had to notify you.
I know. I honestly can't remember. Like, we wanted to know how he died because we wanted to know if, we needed to be concerned about anything genetic with our bloodline. I mean, no one even notified us that he had passed away. We found it online and then we reached out. But I think they must have thought we were reaching out for other reasons, but really we just want to know, do we need to worry about anything health-wise? So I think maybe that's what started the ball rolling, and it was all very official.
Can I ask a follow-up then to that example? And thank you, Peeve. I know that story, and I know how sensitive that is. So thank you for sharing that and being so vulnerable in this moment to give a real life example of using that example. If I can just ask a question now that you shared that, how do you go about the process of contesting something like that?
So it's different probably in every jurisdiction, but you can petition the court. So like I mentioned before, there will be just some random judge. And that's also why I really emphasize the importance of your guardianship documents, because, it's just some judge who's a person who has their own experiences and brings their own biases into their judgment. So the judge who maybe it was a daughter who was abandoned by her father. And if she says, oh, these daughters are contesting this will, they deserve something. I'm going to give them something, even though they hadn't spoken in decades or whatever. They'll bring their own biases into that. And yeah, it probably is different in every jurisdiction, but you would just petition the court. And that's the beauty of the trust, is that there's no public document. Mm-hmm. It's hard to contest something that you don't know what it says. When you do know what it says, a lot easier to contest it. It was funny what you were saying, a story that just popped into your head. Once you start thinking about estate planning, it's literally everywhere. It's in movies, books, it's everywhere. Because, it's part of life. Death is part of life. And planning for death is extremely sensitive. I acknowledge that. It's not, the most fun thing to spend your money on, for one, or spend your time thinking about. But it is so important. I have clients and people in my family even whose relatives have just left a mess, and it takes years to clean up and so much emotional energy. And we all know that as mothers, you don't have emotional energy to spare. there's nothing left in the tank once you've taken care of your kids and your partner and yourself, most importantly yourself, there's usually very little left. And do you really want to spend that going through, years of probate court, sorting out all the bank accounts, sorting out all the retirement accounts and investment accounts, properties in other states, all of these things that you acquire during your life? Leaving a plan for the people behind you is really the biggest gift that you can give them.
It allows you to mourn instead of having to mourn while you're trying to be the person that's responsible for cleaning up the mess.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's a good segue into the next question, which is about states. Now, we know that you are licensed in California, and so you can speak on behalf of California law, which we understand. But generally speaking, for all of our listeners that may not be in California, can you give some guidance on what they need to do to just make sure that they have everything that they need, all their processes in place? How can they ensure they're doing all of the right things for their respective states?
As an attorney would, I recommend you speak to an attorney. I know there's a lot of alternatives, DIY things out there, but the only way that you'll know whether those plans would work for you, because they probably do work for a small portion of the population, those, DIY plans would work for them. But you won't know until you're gone. And who's going to have to clean up the mess? Your kids, your spouse, the people that you leave behind. They're going to be the ones to figure out whether or not it works. Okay. So if you want to avoid that, then you're going to want to speak to an attorney. The one thing that I can speak to also is in California, we do not have a probate tax. So that might be something that you also want to consider. If you're anywhere near the threshold of your probate tax of your state, you're definitely going to want to speak with an attorney and have an attorney handle your estate. So it varies. There's no estate tax in California. There is a federal estate tax. And right now, I think it's around $13 million per person. So that doesn't affect too many people, but that's a temporary number that is scheduled to sunset, I think, in either 2025 or 2026. And then it could go down to much lower. Another reason why you want to work with an attorney is because I'm the one who follows all of those laws and, will track, okay, your estate is coming close. We got to do some more advanced tax planning. Let's get your CPA involved. Let's get your financial planner involved. Let's make some changes now to save money and time in the future and for your kids to set them up in the best way possible. So really, generally, every state, you're going to want to talk to an attorney in your state and probably avoid the DIY plan unless you just want to push that work onto the next generation. So yeah, I guess the choice is up to you.
Fair. Thank you.
Oh, man. Yeah, this is a lot. And I heard you say this earlier in our conversation that these are part of the ancillary documents that you have with your trust that you dedicate as power of attorney, you dedicate maybe a medical spokesperson. One that I recently heard of is a digital executor. So I was listening to this online conversation about each, and you should correct me because you do follow these things, but what I heard is that each email address can be associated with over 100 different online accounts or profiles. And so that's part of your assets, your digital assets. And so you should designate someone who's technologically savvy to handle all of that, which might be someone different than you would have take care of your kids or different than making medical decisions. So it seems like in a lot of people's real worlds, all those people are going to be different people. And so you need to kind of really be thoughtful about who you're designating to take each one of those responsibilities when you're not able to do it.
Absolutely. And there are now popping up these services that you can maintain a safe of all your passwords, so that the people that you do want to have access to those, deciding what happens to your Facebook page. Do you want an in memoriam page or you want it deleted? What do you, all of those decisions so that, again, the next generation doesn't have to make those decisions for you, have to guess at what you would want. But yes, it's a new part of our lives, our digital assets and our digital lives, really, that the estate planning has to change to navigate those too. There are some services that are available. And then there's also, that's something where if you maintain a relationship with your estate planning attorney, it's something that you can entrust to them and then they'll be able to give access to whoever you want access to. It really does depend on the person. And it's like I say, when you're picking your guardianship people, the person that you want making breakfast for your kids in the morning is probably not the same person that you want handling their financial, assets and their financial life. That warm, fuzzy person that's going to read them a book at bedtime is different probably than the person you want managing their assets. So that's really what estate planning does. That's a very important part of the process, is looking at your life and saying, who do I want to fill in these roles if something were to happen to me? And like I always say, it's a remote possibility, but you never know, what's going to happen. Even if you don't die necessarily, a sickness could happen or, any other number of things that you might not be able to serve your family and, your community the way that you want to. So deciding now while you have capacity, what's going to happen when you don't is important.
Yeah, Eve, I'm glad you brought up that question about the digital footprint, because you can see my pen has smoke coming out of it. I was writing down real fast because I think that's another conversation or another part of that to bring up to our estate attorney to say, hey, we never even thought about the digital footprint and what happens with that. Or even with entrepreneurs, what happens to your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, succession planning is also an important part. Business succession planning is important for sure.
And you've said this a couple of times, but just starting to put your stuff in that backpack and having it in place allows you to update it when you need to. And so we have, the documents were so long, but now I'm, as we're talking through all this, I'm realizing I do think maybe it's even still bare bones. We have so much more we could add to it. So is that something we can take those documents and come start working with you here in California, and we could say, just dump that all on you and be like, help, what else do we need to do? We need to update this and, we don't really know where to start. Is that a step we could take?
Yes, absolutely. And it's one that you probably should take. A lot of attorneys recommend every 3 years, but in, this time in our lives when things are changing a lot with new people coming into the world and everything, like I would recommend every year taking a look and making sure that there's nothing that you want to change. Different states have different execution requirements, which is just like how your documents are signed, whether it's in front of a notary or whether it's witnesses. Like you just always want to make sure that the documents that you have are compliant with the state that you're living in. So yeah, I definitely would recommend taking a look. Generally in the legal field, the less is more approach is becoming more common. So like simplifying the documents as much as possible, taking out any extra like legalese and stuff that you don't need. That's where the trends are going. So it doesn't necessarily matter how thick your estate plan is, but you do want to make sure that you have everything in there. There is a document that I always recommend people doing too, which is the remembrances and service memorandum. So saying like what songs you want played, what kind of celebration you want for your life. It could be a stoic practice that I've just become accustomed to just living in this space and dealing with death so much, but like thinking about your obituary, like what do you want that to say? And then working backwards, creating the life that you want, the legacy that you want to leave behind. You've got to live the life to leave the legacy, so it's important work to do now while you're living and while we're all young and have a lot of life left to live, hopefully.
Prayerfully, yeah.
So, being intentional about how you're living now so that you can leave that, great legacy that you want to leave.
Amen. Jillian, I know PV's heard this a million times, but I always say this, even in my speaking engagements, that, when you look at your headstone, and again, it's getting a little morbid, but I'll bring it back to the not so morbid piece. But the headstone, and you have on, the date that you entered this world, which we really don't have any control over, and the date that you leave this world, which we typically do not have control over. We know there's circumstances, right? But we do have control over the dash between those two dates. And so how do we maximize our dash? And it really is, what am I doing on a day-to-day to make sure that I'm living my dash to its fullest?
Speaking of legacies, yeah, I wanted you to ask that question since.
Yeah. I know why you did. And it's only water in my cup, but I may have to upgrade it to some wine here, this stressful piece. So what advice can you give to us to encourage parents or other people to put these estates and trusts in place? Because I can speak for myself, and that's why PV, wanted me to probably lead with that, because this has been a conversation in my family. My parents are kind of old school, and they're like, you and James get along beautifully. So if something happens, you guys will figure it out. And we have a little bit over here. Here's the life insurance here, but there's one here. But it's not a comprehensive plan. And so we've been having lots of conversations without me sounding like a nag or sounding morbid, but I'm also like, we need something, So what advice would you give to people that want to encourage loved ones to do this?
That's a great question. And in a playful way, I could say, like find a good movie that's about an estate plan that goes wrong and say, oh, let's watch this. Or like a book that, because there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of movies, books, like, all those like pop culture references, like say like, oh, like, let's do this. And then maybe use that to kind of segue into the conversation, because I know it's hard to not want to nag.
Right.
And I know it takes a lot of encouragement before people are willing to take that step. And it could be, as people get older, they just don't want to face the reality of their mortality. And, we can all understand that. But like I said before, like when you do not address your estate planning, you're just pushing that work onto the next generation. You're pushing that work onto the people that are going to be left behind. So all of the emotional work, all of the accounting that they'll have to do for all of the, like you're saying, oh, life insurance over here, this asset over here, like putting all that together is a lot of work. I won't deny that. It is a lot of work. And that's where, if you can encourage them to just speak to an attorney, like if you have to go so far as like just booking them a consult. A lot of estate planning attorneys will do a complimentary consult and then have them show them how they can demonstrate how important it is. Saving money is important to them. Putting those numbers down, when I do my strategy consultations, I put it all in an Excel sheet. and I show them and I highlight the number. I'm like, this number, this is what's not going to your kids if you don't get these documents in place. This is what's going to the courts. And usually the number is 5 or 6 figures. Usually.
Wow.
The number is 5 or 6 figures, because when you get all of your estate down on paper, that 3 to 4% adds up quick. If you can't get them in for a consult, that's what I would suggest. Make it play around them in movies and books and articles. If you can forward them some articles, if they're willing to read some articles, I'd say look for those. It's not easy, but doing the work now is the best legacy. You know, one of the most important documents that's an ancillary document that I put together is a memorandum of personal property. So that is deciding who gets the cookbook. That's deciding who gets the engagement ring. That's deciding who gets the painting. The things that people end up fighting over aren't often the things that are the most expensive or the highest value assets. They're often the sentimental things. And you could say, yeah, sure, we get along now. But when we're deciding who gets the special, Christmas decoration or the whatever, like that really holds a lot of sentimental value, maybe like a prized dish, that your mom served whatever it ends up being for your family. Those are the things that often cause the most tension. And most people don't expect that. So I'd say also, like get them talking about who they want to have all the sentimental jewelry, all the things, the little things that are often the ones that people fight over.
So pretty much I need to get them in a car and say, we're going on a field trip, and drive them straight over to an estate attorney and plop them in there and lock the door. Okay.
I was going to say, you're just going to have to bamboozle this one.
I got to just go for it. And this is kind of a follow-up, Jillian. My mom has said oftentimes, I would love your perspective on this. And I don't know if this is true to California as well. But my mom always says, well, Jay, we are senior citizens. And so at the library, they have free resources for senior citizens, and they provide us with someone that can help, I guess, put this stuff together. They haven't talked to said library resource person yet, but she said that there are resources available to senior citizens. So is that a thing? And can you just speak to what that is?
I'm pretty sure attorneys in every single state are required to do pro bono hours.
Yes.
So if it's an attorney who is volunteering their time at this library function, I would say that sounds great.
Okay.
Like that sounds like if it's an attorney who's volunteering their time to serve like a low income or a senior citizen community, like I'd say, yeah, that sounds like a great resource. So I would just vet the person who is providing the services just to be sure that you're getting service from a licensed professional. For me, my process, I make it as streamlined as possible because I work with parents of young children. Primarily, I work with parents of young children, and I know our time is limited and our energy is limited. So I try to make it as pain-free as possible. So I have a very simple 4-meeting process, and they can all be done over Zoom except for the last one. And the last one's a party. I bring treats, it's fun. So once you get the process going, if you're working with the right attorney who has a good system in place, it can be done fairly quickly and fairly painlessly. So I have usually a strategy session. Once people decide they want to work with me, then we have our design meeting, and that's where we get into the nitty gritty of going through who we want where and how we want to design our backpack. After that, the work's all on me. So I do all the drafting, and I send the drafts of all of the documents. And then once everybody is okay with how the documents are, once everything is exactly how people want, then it's signing day. So really, it's not that much once you get into it, but you do have to do a little bit of the emotional work. Mm-hmm. I won't downplay that. You do have to do the emotional work of deciding, who you want serving where. But if you're working with an attorney that has a good streamlined process, it's fairly painless.
Amen.
Make it happen, Jay. Make it happen.
I'm on it.
Man, we have covered so much, and I definitely have a lot of to-dos sitting on my to-do list right now. So I will be contacting you, Jillian, with my little backpack that we've got. I mean, we covered a lot, but is there anything that we didn't cover that you think our listeners should know or be thinking about or should be aware of? Open mic, did we hit all of the high notes or low notes maybe?
I really think you did. When it comes down to it, I especially would encourage people to at least just get their nomination of guardians down in writing at the very, very, very minimum. And, really think of it as an investment in your kids and your future. Because I know it would be more fun to go to Disneyland or whatever, like spend the money on basically anything else would be more fun. But I really do find that my clients have that peace of mind is real. The things that keep you up in the middle of the night. There's enough things that keep us up in the middle of the night as parents, as moms, in this world that we live in. Like, there's enough that this is one thing that you can check off your list relatively simply. So if you're on the fence, I'd say just book a consult and find somebody that, you jive with, that has a good system in place, and it can be painless. Yeah, it doesn't have to be hard. Thinking about your death actually really does make you appreciate life.
Yeah.
So it is something that I think will find even greater benefit beyond just the peace of mind. But planning that, I love that dash. Live that dash every day.
That's right. Jillian, this has been dynamic, and thank you for all of the information. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of follow-up questions. And I wanted to just highlight one thing. I know we've talked a lot about partners or spouses and people with children, but I wanted to also, I guess, bring to the forefront the value of even singles, people that don't have children and that don't have a partner, a life partner or a spouse. But you mentioned $185,000 threshold in California, and people will consult with their local attorneys to determine what their thresholds are in their respective states. But I just wanted to highlight still that even if you don't have a partner, this is not an exercise just for people that are married or that have children, but you still have assets and loved ones to think about when you go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you want to leave it all to the cat, you can do that. Those are some of my favorite stories. Those, like billionaires that leave it all to a dog.
Yeah.
Like, amazing. But yeah, I mean, really, it is important. Every person, that legacy you leave, you want to make sure that your money is going to go to charities that you support, benefit people that you care about, or things that are important to you rather than going to court fees. Like, let's avoid that.
Amen.
Get your assets to go where you want them to go and to serve who you want them to serve. So
my mom actually just did that for a woman who was elderly woman in her church. She was the executor of her will and trust. And she went through, after she passed away, like how she wanted all of her assets to be distributed to the charities that were important to her. And I mean, it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was a lot of work for my mom to go through those one by one, but they were outlined. And so it was like that part of the work was done for her. And it is, I'm sure everyone feels better that she knew that all of the charities that was important to her, near and dear to her heart, were taken care of by whatever she could offer them. So yeah, good point, Jay.
This was awesome.
This was really awesome. And Jillian, I know you said that you're just, focused on California, of course, but I want to make sure that all of our listeners, because we do have a lot in California, know where to find you. So can you tell us like website or how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah. So if you go to peaceofmindplanning.co, I do have a free on-demand webinar there. You can learn all the basics of estate planning in 45 minutes or less. If you do the 2X, you learn it in just over 20 minutes. And that's also a good tool to send to people. I have a lot of people that send it to their husbands and say like, okay, like you need to at least listen to this so that you can understand the importance of it. And then I also do live webinars that you can register for on my website. You can reach me at Jillian@peaceofmindplanning.co also. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook. So yeah, you can find me everywhere.
Awesome. We'll link all of that in the show notes too, so everyone can go find all those ways to find you. Thank you so, so much for your time today.
Thank you. This was fun.
Jillian, you are awesome. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge and your time and just your compassion too, because like you said, this isn't the easiest thing to talk about, but we can infuse some humor and some life stuff into this inevitable thing that's going to happen to all of us, then I think that it makes it a lot easier to discuss. So thank you.
Totally. And that's what I think also, like as a woman, like it was important to me that people in my community had a mother and a woman to go to deal with this stuff. Because yeah, it's not easy to talk about. And there are a lot of things to consider. And yeah, you want to have somebody that you feel comfortable talking to. So Hopefully that's me for a lot of people.
Definitely. Thanks for doing what you do. Whew, that was awesome. I did appreciate you bringing up a few times like how emotional it can be to think about all of this. It can be kind of morbid, and it's not like necessarily that enjoyable to think about, oh, what do I want to happen when I'm gone? But wow, so important.
Absolutely. We don't know when our time comes. And so I think I can speak for myself. Up until recently, meaning the last 10 years, I always associated death and passing with people that were in their 80s and 90s. And that happens when you get older. And with lifing for all of us, and as we get older, we realize that there isn't an age limit. And so if we rewrite that narrative, then say, okay, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but now I have a little person, and John and I tend to be together more often than not. And so God forbid something happens to John and I at the same time. Now we have a little person, and we need to figure out what's best for him. Where is he going to go? Who is he going to live with? Or making those types of decisions. Like you said, it was an emotional process for us to think about power of attorney and medical asks, all of that. But it's also a very important thing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an emotional journey, but I will tell you that it's also rewarding knowing that you've done the hard work and now you can live life, and that your loved ones will be able to pick up the torch, so to speak, and carry it forward when you're gone.
Yeah. And you're just like minimizing the mess that you're leaving them as much as possible, and like hopefully eliminating it. But what was really interesting to me, and, like you said, the last several years, life is lifing, and this has happened. It's not just passing away, right? You don't need these things in place just for death. You need them for illness, for unexpected disability. Like there's kind of a long list of things where this can kick in and really save your butt from having to, in the moment that you least want to and have the capacity to make all these decisions and figure these things out. If that's already in place, boom, it just clicks in. And Jillian was awesome. I loved how she said, she wanted to create this business so that, her community had a trusted kind of motherly person to come to feel safe and secure and vulnerable and like work through all of this emotional stuff, but also be really confident that they have the legal advice that they need, that someone who's keeping up with all the laws and the regulations and like the digital asset piece that we talked about, like these new things that are coming in. And I loved how she talked about not making these documents like just ginormous to make them ginormous, full of legal jargon, that she, the trend is like reducing to just the bare minimum of what's necessary to be in these documents to actually guide the process. So anyway, all of that, like you can't do it on your own.
No, I love how she said assemble your A-team. Put together your A-team that includes your estate attorney, your financial planner, and your CPA. We also need to recognize that everybody does not have all of those players in place. And that does not mean that you wait until you have those players in place to move forward. It's just a recognition of it's ideal to have people on your team that can bring their respective strengths to make this process as easy as they can for you.
Absolutely.
Baby steps.
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. That was fun.
It was fun and very informative. So thank you, P. Thank you for bringing Jillian to our community and to our circle and conversation today.
Absolutely. Love you.
Love you too.
Everyone should go call all of their friends and tell them to estate plan.
In fact, call your friends, call your family, call anybody that you love and have this conversation, because it's a good one to have for sure.
All right. Love you. Talk to you soon.
Love you. See you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our conversation and our inner circle.
Follow us on Instagram, _It's a Mother Podcast. And we look forward to you and your best friends joining us next episode.
Leave a rating on this podcast app. It really helps us get our conversations to more friends out there, more friendship circles, and more women and more mothers. And that's what we're here for, to broaden the conversation, to bring everybody into the circle.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Go call your best friend.